Skyridge, the very last Wizards of the Coast set. Also the last set to ever have a Kadabra in it. The low print run and amazing art across cards makes this one of the most collectible sets out there. But what about for the competitive player base? What did Skyridge have to offer? Well, we got Beedrill, another great Umbreon, Desert Shaman, and Underground Expedition that all found their way into various decks. We also have the Ball Engine, which I'm a big fan of. It caters more to my personal play style. Those were the best, most playable cards in the set. Per tradition, we should also look at the worst cards in the set just to set our standard here. Crystal Kabutops is easy pickings just because the Crystal type cards were never really meant to be played competitively. They're just collector's pieces, but a stage 2 with 90 HP and nigh unusable attacks that just are not good in any sense. It pains me to say that realistically it's probably Shuckle. A non-evolving basic that's gonna fall down to 50 damage is pretty sad, and the Shuckle in this artwork knows it. Yes, Vase Body is useful early game. There's not a whole lot that's gonna be able to touch it in the first couple of turns, but after that, there's nothing this card can do. It would be usable if it had free retreat, but a retreat cost of 2 for a basic that has 30 HP? And a mediocre attack that costs 2 energy? No, this Shuckle's not getting played in any decks. But there are plenty of other cards that players could pull from Skyridge packs that didn't quite make it into the tier 1 decks, but were still good playable cards. So in this video we're going to look at the underrated and underappreciated cards in Skyridge, starting with my number 9, which is Xatu. You can pull off a lot of rogue shenanigans with this card thanks to its Pokebody synchronicity, which allows it to utilize any technical machine, giving Xatu access to 9 different 1 energy attacks that can all be paid for with the same single rainbow energy. And the fun doesn't stop there. Don't you dare forget about Miracle Spheres Alpha, Beta, and Gamma, as well as Mystery Plates Alpha, Beta, Delta, and Gamma. Clearly you're not going to use all of them because they have varied usefulness, but Xatu offers a pretty unique experience in that you can run Xatu in a deck and kind of custom fit whatever attacks you want it to use without being limited by Xatu's psychic type. Now, running a bunch of different types of energy with Xatu, you can pull off some pretty wild stuff. Xatu's one of the few Pokemon that can actually fully utilize these Miracle Spheres. I love Do the Wave style decks, and Skyridge does have a Wigglytuff in it that has Do the Wave, but it's been heavily nerfed. It requires coin flips now. It's not good. Luckily, Skyridge gave us another card that does Do the Wave, but better, and it is my number 8 pick, Golbat. Strength in numbers costs 3 colorless energy and deals 30 damage plus 10 more damage for any Zubat, Golbat, or Crobat on your bench. Essentially, if you get your setup done right, which is pretty simple to pull off, you're going to be dealing 60 damage for 3 energy. If you're playing Neo on, it's not going to come anywhere close to the amount of damage you can do with Blossom's Flower Dance, but it requires a lot less setup since it's a lot easier just to get Zubats on your bench than it is to evolve up a bunch of Oddish into Blossoms. But if you're playing E-Card, then a turn 3 60 damage hits right in the sweet spot, especially considering that the turn before you can use Poison Sound Wave to either confuse or poison your opponent's active before dealing that 60 damage. The card does leave a bit to be desired even in the E-Card specialty format, which is why my number 7 pick is Crobat. Now, of course, a deck that's centered around strength in numbers is gonna focus more heavily on Golbat, but that doesn't mean you should overlook the usefulness of evolving up into Crobat. Evolving is gonna remove any special conditions on Golbat. It's gonna give you 20 extra HP and access to free retreat. In addition to some nice spooky artwork, the carry-off Poke Power can be pretty useful to stop your opponent from playing specific Pokemon from their hand that you don't want to see hit the field, and the 3 energy that you were using for Golbat are gonna carry over to Crobat, and Double Cross is a pretty solid attack. I really like it because I'm terrible at coin flips, and depending on your coin flips, this attack is either gonna do 40 damage, 80 damage, or if you hit double tails, then the defending Pokemon is now confused and poisoned. The reason that Crobat is higher up on this list than Golbat is that Crobat's usually included in strength and number decks just as a way to give Golbat a way to remove special conditions and retreat to the bench for free. When there's really a lot more to the card that can be used, I think it justifies more than just a 1 or 2 of in those Golbat decks. Number 6 is Poliwrath. I like my tadpoles and I feel like this one is very underrated. The Strange Spiral Pokepower lets you discard an energy card off of Poliwrath if it's in the active spot, and if you do, your opponent's Pokemon is confused, which is a pretty useful tool as long as you have the spare energy card to discard. And then Spiral Punch is a 3 energy attack that's going to deal 40 damage, and then you flip a coin until you get tails, and the attack does an extra 20 damage for each heads. The guaranteed 40 for 3 energy isn't very good, but the chance that you're going to deal 60 damage for 3 energy is good. The fact that you can stack near infinite damage on this as long as the coin flips are hitting the right way is also very good. It's understandable that Poliwrath gets overlooked because no matter what format you're playing in, there are better fighting types that do their specific thing better, and this Poliwrath doesn't exactly have a specific thing. Strange Spiral and Spiral Punch don't really have a lot of synergy together, but that doesn't mean they can't be effective. While we're on the topic of tadpoles, let's go ahead and mention Politoed. Firstly, by accomplishing something that few cards do, which is actually using the ugliness of the e-reader border to actually make the artwork pop more. When the artwork could already stand on its own, this is one of those cards that actually looks better in person than any zoomed in picture can do it justice. But secondly, for having potentially the best water energy acceleration in all of E-Card, if not all of Neo-On. For 1 energy, you can Rain Dance. Given the right setup, you can be dropping 4 or 5 water energy from your hand straight onto Politoed. Juggler and Fisherman make that pretty easy to pull off on those first couple of turns when you're evolving up into Poliwhirl and then Politoed anyway. The goal is gonna be get as much energy onto a Politoed as you can in the first 3 or 4 turns of the game. With 110 HP, you can feel pretty confident in placing all of those energy onto Politoed, but that sets you up for a mid-game energy splash that is not only gonna deal 70 damage, which is very heavy for mid-game even. Energy Splash is then gonna let you move 2 water energy off of Politoed onto 1 or 2 of your benched Pokemon, giving you a way to power up your backup attackers, including a nice little loophole for getting water energy onto Suicune and Articuno. The reason I think that Politoed doesn't see a lot of play is because odds are you're only going to be able to get off 1 energy splash, and there are just better alternatives for getting more water energy onto your bench. But if you're playing in Neo-On, you do have access to Pokemon Breeder through Legendary Collection, so this is the closest thing you have to replicating a turn 2 Rain Dance. While on the topic of water decks, number 4 on my list of underrated Skyridge cards is Dewgong, with a very interesting 2 energy attack in Freeze Lock. You deal 20 damage and then you flip a coin, and if heads, your opponent can attach energy cards from their hand to their active Pokemon. And yes, there are a lot of ways to get around this, and yes, you have to flip a coin to even get this effect, but it could be very disruptive, because this is not an effect that is attached to whatever Pokemon's taking the 20 damage. This is an effect that is attached to your opponent. So no matter what Pokemon they're switching into the active position, they're not going to be able to attach an energy if this effect is in play. If you're playing against a deck that doesn't have a way to attach energy from the discard or from the deck, or to move energy around from Pokemon to Pokemon, then hitting a Freeze Lock turn after turn can shut down your opponent's deck. It'll force them to attach energy exclusively to Pokemon on their bench and then try to get those Pokemon into the active position, which can be more difficult than it sounds within the E-Card format, because a lot of the most heavily played Pokemon have a retreat cost of 2, and there's not a ton of switching mechanics available, which does play into the Crushing Ice attack as well. It's going to deal 40 damage plus 10 more damage for each energy in the defending Pokemon's retreat cost. Even if you are consistently hitting for 60 with this attack, using 4 energy for 60 damage isn't great. But, you know, if the point of running Dewgong in your deck is just to Freeze Lock, but then later on you have the option to deal heavier damage with Crushing Ice, then sure. The only scenarios where I see Crushing Ice becoming relevant is against decks like Steelix and Tyranitar, since both of those Pokemon have retreat costs of 4. Number 3 on the list is Magcargo, and there's probably a lot of personal bias because I love this card. Most of my favorite animals are the really slow ones, especially slugs and snails, so Magcargo hits it for me there. Also really dig this Mitsuhiro Arita artwork. Magcargo can be a great addition to fighting decks and fire decks, depending on what type of energy you want to add, or if you just want to splash in some rainbow energy so that you can fully use Crushing Lava, but the versatility is nice. With Crushing Lava, you're going to be dealing a base damage of 40 for 3 energy, 2 colorless and a fighting, and you have the option of discarding a fire energy, which is going to burn your opponent's active Pokemon, or you can discard a fighting energy. And if you do that, this attack's going to deal 60 damage instead of 40. If you're playing within E-Card, then you already know that 60 damage is the magic number. 60 damage for 3 energy is always going to be good, which gives you a good fighting type attacking option for fire type decks if you are, just splashing in a couple of fighting energy, or if you're just using rainbow energy. But fire decks always have a way to recover energy from the discard, just because a lot of fire type attackers discard energy. So for those decks, dealing 40 damage, burning your opponent, and putting a fire energy in the discard isn't bad. Those types of recovery that you see in fire decks can also help you use the Streaming Mantle Pokemon power in a more advantageous way. You mill 3 cards and your opponent mills 3 cards, and then you take 3 energy cards from your discard and shuffle them back into your deck. The idea being that hopefully you're just discarding energy and shuffling them right back in, or you're discarding Pokemon that you have recovery for, hoping that your opponent is having to discard Pokemon that they don't have recovery for, or key supporters that they're not going to be able to use from the discard. I have playtested this card in some different types of rogue decks, both fighting and fire and hybrid decks. And yeah, it's not exactly a tier 1 card, but it does fare surprisingly well against a lot of big archetypes. Number 2 on this list is Arcanine. I know that even within E-Card there's a lot of competition between Stage 1 fire types with Rapidash, Ninetales, Houndoom, even Flareon sometimes, but I'm still surprised that Arcanine gets overlooked whenever people are picking through those Stage 1 fire types. If Growlithe is in your active position when you evolve up into Arcanine, you get to use Energy Recharge, you flip 3 coins, and for each heads, you can attach a basic energy from your discard to Arcanine. Fire decks are gonna have fire energy in the discard, meaning that if you're lucky, you can pull off a turn 2 White Flames and deal 70 damage. Discarding all 3 of those fire energy is worth it too, because odds are you're probably gonna get an Oko if you're able to pull this off on turn 2. And even without any energy next turn, you can attach 1 energy from your hand and use Shake, which is a gusting attack for 1 energy that's also dealing chip damage. I don't know what else to say about this card. Yeah, it can fizzle out pretty fast, but it's good. This Arcanine is a good card, but it still isn't quite as underrated and overlooked as my number 1 pick for the most underrated card in Skyridge, Nidoqueen. Purely because of its evolution helper, Poke Power, and the shenanigans you can pull off with Stage 2 decks. But before we take a closer look at evolution helper, a quick refresher on official Wizards of the Coast rulings. Wizards ruled that you could evolve Eevee the turn it was played, because technically you're evolving it through its Pokemon Power Chain reaction instead of playing an evolution card from your hand. This also got around any powers like Fossil Aerodactyl that blocked you from evolving your Pokemon because you weren't evolving Eevee by playing an evolution card from your hand. We see the same kind of ruling with Koga's Kakuna. You are allowed to evolve into Koga's Kakuna from Koga's Weedle by playing Koga's Kakuna from your hand, and then immediately using its power Emerge to evolve again on the same turn into Koga's Beedrill. Because, according to Wizards, you are not playing an evolution card from your hand, so you are able to use the Pokemon power to work around that evolution rule. So back to Nidoqueen and Evolution Helper. Once during your turn, if Nidoqueen is on your bench, you may search your deck for a card that evolves from your active Pokemon and attach it to your active Pokemon. There is no official Wizards of the Coast ruling for Evolution Helper, but if we base it on the precedents they had set with Eevee and Koga's Kakuna, Evolution Helper is going to let you evolve your active Pokemon twice in the same turn. If you have 2 Nidoqueen on the bench, you're going to be able to evolve twice on the same turn straight from your deck. Yeah, that's a lot of setup, but considering what you're going to be able to pull off if you can get 1 or 2 Nidoqueen onto the bench, if you're investing your Professor Elm's training methods into evolving up Nidoqueen, then you won't need them for the rest of the game because you're going to be able to evolve up your active as quickly as you want. It is a bit limiting that the Pokemon you're evolving with Evolution Helper has to be in the active slot, but I don't feel like that's too much of a drawback. You're not only streamlining your Stage 2 decks, but it's also a pretty solid way to thin your deck and smooth out your draws. Probably more than any other underrated video that I've done so far, I really want to hear what you guys think about my Skyridge list. I do want to give honorable mentions to Relic Hunter and Ancient Ruins. You don't see these pop up in a lot of deck lists, but I think they are solid one-ofs for a lot of decks. Just, if anything, they're accurately rated. As I said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Do you agree with my list? Would you shift the positions of any cards? Are there any cards that you feel are underrated that didn't make my list? Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want more vintage Pokemon TCG content, I've got a channel full of it, always adding new stuff. Social media links are in the description, and I will see you next video.